Very much so. Is the Bernanke Fed bankrupt in the whole U.S. government, destroying the dollar and turning America into a second-rate power? Is America's whole economic future literally at stake over this question? Joining me to discuss, Bob McTeer, former president of the Dallas Fed, Andy Bush, strategist at BMO Capital Markets. Bob McTeer, it's great to see you because along with President Obama and Alan Blinder of Princeton, you're really the only person I know who will defend Bernanke's pump priming, $600 billion of quantitative easing. So I'm honored to hear your first riposte. What are you thinking? Why are you defending them?
Well, first, Blinder had a terrific article in today's Wall Street Journal. I'm defending him because it's the right thing to do. I don't necessarily believe that it ought to be called QE2. That's unfortunate. But we needed more money and more credit, and we needed to act forcefully. And we saw in the Depression and in the Japanese situation what happens when you're sort of half-hearted in your policies. So we needed it. Bernanke's delivering it. And it's foolish to me to think that it won't do any good on employment and output, yet it will cause inflation and debasement of the dollar.
Well, Andy Bush, Sir Bob McTeer is sort of saying a lot what President Obama says, that the problem with the policy is he doesn't communicate it well enough, that the people don't understand it, Andy. But there's another option. Option B is people do understand it. And Andy, here's my question. Apart from the technicalities of quantitative easing and creating $600 billion more money, don't you think the public and the politicians see this Fed action as another big government spending stimulus plan? Isn't that really, and that they fear it's going to bankrupt the country?
Right. Well, there's certainly that. They're very circumspect over additional government intervention in the economy, whether it comes from the Fed or whether it comes from the federal government. But I would say, you know, there's really no sound research that the Fed can point to says $600 billion will give us 50 to 75 basis points of easing, and that will help the economy. There are no data points for this. So the Fed's out on a limb here. I would say there is one data point that we do know for certain. It's Economics 101. If you increase the supply of something, ceteris paribus, Bob, I think the price goes down. If I remember back to my days when I was at Ohio Wesleyan University and then University of Chicago, I think we learned that. And that's the problem with the dollar. When Bernanke talked about it on August 27th, we saw the dollar lose about 10% of its value. Since then, when they enacted it, then the market was a little bit disappointed. Then we had a non-farm payroll number that was very good. And you can see what happened at the long end of the yield curve. It got very dicey.
I just want to qualify. Ceteris paribus. Does that mean all things the same?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up. This is, after all, a primetime show. All right, Bob McTeer, ceteris paribus, all things the same. I still believe the government thinks the Federal Reserve is spending huge quantities, $600 billion of taxpayer money, after $1 trillion of a failed fiscal stimulus program, and that the Fed is going to bankrupt us, and that the taxpayers, Bob McTeer, are going to have to bail out the Fed the way they bailed out other government agencies like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. What's your response to that public perception?
Well, you're probably right that that's the public perception.
Right.
However, that's not correct. That's not correct. The Fed is not spending taxpayer money. The Fed is buying something that it can sell later. Everybody thinks the Fed spent a lot of taxpayer money during the crisis, when, as a matter of fact, it earned a lot of profit for the taxpayer and for the Treasury during those operations. Think of this, Larry, like you would think of the surge in Iraq. We were doing okay, but not quite good enough, and more was needed, and the more helped a lot.
Well, that's a very interesting idea, this Iraqi surge, but I'm going to sort of put that aside for a minute. When you say it's not the government's money, it's not the taxpayers' money, I want to disagree. The Fed owns this gigantic portfolio of mortgage-backed securities and Treasury bonds. If the prices of those Treasury bonds collapse because of the Fed's inflationary cheap dollar policy, the public most certainly will be on the hook, Robert McTeer. You know that. The Fed is independent, but it is a creature of Congress, and it is part of the U.S. government. If the Fed fails, Bob McTeer, the taxpayers will have to bail it out. And I think people know that.
No, that's just not true, Larry.
It is true. Well, who's going to step in if their portfolio collapses the way Fannie Mae's portfolio collapsed? Who's going to step in?
The money is being created as they purchase these things. So if they lose a little money on them, which they never have before, it will be an opportunity cost loss only. It will be a loss of a potential gain. It won't be a loss beginning with some baseline.
Andy Bush, I don't know that I agree with Bob McTeer on that.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, this business about the world attacking us that you saw Dave Malpass attacking us and saying that the dollar is destined to fall. Okay, you could argue about that, but don't you think people out there believe that the dollar has become a second-rate currency, that the U.S. took second place or third place at the G20 meeting, that President Obama took second place or third place at the G20 meeting, and that the United States is no longer the world leader on the economy, that, to coin a phrase, we may be losing the economic Cold War? Is that part of the public's fear factor?
Well, I certainly would say that it's very difficult to critique a country like China for manipulating their currency when you're engaged in very similar behavior. Getting back to the point, though, that you were making, yes, I mean, the fact that the president came away from not only the G20, but also those meetings in Seoul, South Korea with the Free Trade Pact, he came away with nothing. And that looked very poor as far as the United States being able to lead an economic summit and lead it in the direction where it needs to go. There was so much acrimony directed at the United States, primarily because the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency for the world. And when it appears that the U.S. is debasing its currency, everyone, I'm talking about the Prime Minister of Germany, of Brazil, China, everyone's critiquing the United States, and rightfully so, because they own our dollars.
Go ahead. Bob McTeer, you get the last word quickly, please.
Let me comment on China. They are pegging their currency to the dollar, and we are conducting monetary policy based on internal U.S. economic circumstances. To equate those two things is absurd.
I think that's the Fed's problem, not the solution.
I
we
disagree.
Live in a
the rest of the
economy.
world looks at it very differently, Bob. When they own our dollar and we're spending money like that or creating money, I think they have every right to stand up and say, stop.
All right. I have to leave it there,
We create
gentlemen.
money every time we conduct open market operations. This is not unique.
Do we have to create $600 billion more after $2 trillion a year ago? Is that really necessary? Or might you call that Keynesian fiscal pump priming overkill? How about that?
I doubt that much will be needed, but if it's needed, let's have it.
All right, let's have it. Bob McTeer says let's have it. Andy Bush says let's not have it. I'll just cap this by saying this. The presidential campaign will start in a couple of months, okay? By February, you're going to see a whole bunch of candidates, certainly on the Republican side, and King Dollar and QE2 and Federal Reserve and $600 billion is going to be on the table. We're going to debate monetary and dollar policy for the first time in a presidential campaign since the 19th century, and I love it.